Welcome to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims, one Texan at a time.
Welcome back to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims, one Texan at a time with Miguel Garza. Miguel is the founder of the MF Garza Law Firm, where he fights for Texans injured in accidents ranging from car and trucking crashes to catastrophic injuries. I'm Kevin Rosenquist, and today Miguel is here to explain insurance coverage options. Miguel, welcome.
All right, thank you. Good to see you.
So we're going to talk about what you consider things that every Texan should know before an accident happens about their coverage. Why is having the right insurance coverage so incredibly critical before an accident ever happens?
Well, and people may have heard this one, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's when it comes to insurance, it's always better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, right? And because insurance can be expensive depending on what kind of insurance you're trying to have or what type of policy that you're seeking to obtain. But having insurance is always better to have, in my opinion. I've been doing this about 13 years now, and I've seen the pitfalls of people not having insurance or having inadequate coverage that really just causes problems or even nightmares for not just them, but their families, not being able to work, not be able to support the family, and having to deal with, significant injuries that are just lingering and causing all kinds of discomfort. Really can make a big impact on the family. And having the right insurance coverage is extremely important, not only for that, but also for the general public. That's why it's state law to have insurance, especially liability insurance, in case, the unfortunate situation happens where you do get in a wreck and you're at fault, because if you don't have proper coverage or don't have any coverage at all, then you could be personally responsible for any damages that person seeks to obtain against you in a lawsuit. And so having insurance will cover you in that situation so you don't have to personally pay out of pocket.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have are there certain types of insurance or coverage that you recommend? Because, I know, especially for people, you don't have a lot of money, usually a lot of people will just get the liability because that's the state, or at least a lot of states is the state law. I remember when I was, fresh out of college, I only had liability, so I didn't have any money. So I had to try to skip it wherever I could. It wasn't the smartest thing in the world, but it was all I could do. But what is your recommendation for coverage that people really need to have?
Sure. So there's three policies that everybody absolutely has to have. One that's required by law is liability insurance, right? You got to have liability. In the state of Texas, the minimum state policy limits are $30,000 for liability coverage, right? The next one is underinsured, or what's also called uninsured motorist coverage. Obviously, that's kind of self-explanatory. The uninsured means somebody's not insured. And then your insurance company can step into the shoes of the other carrier that would have been providing coverage had the person had insurance. And then underinsured, if the person doesn't have enough coverage and your damages exceed that, that's the same policy, the uninsured and underinsured. And then the other one's called personal injury protection coverage, also known as PIP. That's what's known as a no-fault policy, and it's usually pretty cheap. And it helps you when maybe you're in a bind and you're still treating, or the other company is still investigating and you need money now. And then, the last one is also collision coverage. You get into an accident and the other party's still investigating. They're not going to fix your car, and you may not have a vehicle and you need to work, take your kids somewhere, whatever the case may be. So I'd say those four policies are the most important that I would recommend.
I've heard before that the uninsured, underinsured one is the one that people miss the most. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Absolutely. And because the state of Texas, at least, every insurance company, when you go in and get a policy, they have to offer you uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage when you're getting your liability coverage. And if you don't get that policy, then you have to sign what's called a rejection form saying that I rejected it. They also have to offer you the personal injury protection, or the PIP policy, as well, and you have to reject that as well if you don't want to get it. Now, people think that, I'm fully covered, meaning that, this is extremely vague and ambiguous. That doesn't mean that you have good insurance coverage. That just means you have the state minimum requirements technically for your vehicle. And if you don't want to pay as much, or you may not be able to afford it, you're thinking, oh, I just need what's required by law. I don't have to get this additional stuff. So, but people don't really understand how much they're going to need it in case they get into a severe accident or their loved ones are in a severe accident. Having those extra policies is extremely important, just to be able to have additional coverage in case the other driver doesn't have insurance or is severely underinsured.
Yeah, and underinsured, interesting thing to say, because you mentioned that the minimum coverage for liability is 30 grand in Texas. I mean, let's be honest, injuries to any sort of real injury and real damage to your car, I mean, you hit 30 grand real quick.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, pretty much every case requires at least one MRI, and an MRI ranges between 2 to 3 grand.
Yeah.
And then imagine if you have to get 4 or 5 of them right there. That's close to 15 grand right there. And that's not even including your physical therapy or other specialist appointments that you need to have. So definitely to have more than less. Better to have more than less, excuse me.
A lot of us out there have our own personal feelings on insurance companies and how they're looking out for us and all the stuff that goes on with them. So I think it's a natural reaction to want to get as, pay them as little money as you absolutely have to. How do you help clients figure out what they really do truly need beyond just those state minimums?
Well, the example I typically tell them for the underinsured motorist policy is, let's just say that the other driver, like, you're not at fault, the other driver is, and they have the state minimums of $30,000, but you got $100,000 in medical bills, right? You had to have a surgery or, whatever the case may be. Then all you can collect from that person and that insurance policy is $30,000, and you're left with a $70,000 bill. Now, you could potentially go after that person and go to trial and get a judgment against them and try to get assets they may have, or get access to any additional funds that they may have. But that's a long road, and typically, most people don't want to go that route. They want to get a quick and easy resolution so they can move on with their lives. So if you don't want to be responsible for that additional coverage or the additional bills, then I would definitely get an underinsured or uninsured motorist policy of probably about at least $100,000. I think is a good policy to have. And I always try to explain to them, it's always better to have it, not need it. It's just very, very important to have, because I've seen a lot of people come in with severe injuries, and all I can tell them is that this is all I can get you, and there's nothing else I can do unless you want to go to trial. And typically people don't want to do that.
Yeah, understandably so.
Yeah.
For anyone who watches any amount of football, you see plenty of insurance commercials. They're everywhere on TV, it seems. When it comes to picking what company to go with, obviously I'm not asking you to give a pitch for anybody here, but are some companies, in your experience, way better to work with versus others?
Absolutely. I'm not going to name any names, but you do see a lot of these companies pouring a lot into marketing and advertising, and so they can get more clients and get more premiums and things of that nature. But that doesn't always pan out on paying out on the claims process. A lot of these insurance carriers will lowball you, and that will require you to get an attorney like myself to go and file a lawsuit to hold them accountable. And, definitely want to go with some of the more better and well-known insurance companies out there. In my opinion, some of these companies that represent veterans or military personnel tend to be better carriers than other ones. Can't name names, of course, but definitely keep an eye out for that. And again, kind of like I said in the previous episode, do your research. Make sure that you know which ones have better experiences, have better reviews, better clientele, whatever the case may be, because all these insurance companies are recommend hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and you just want to make sure that you're going to be properly compensated if you do need their help.
Yeah, don't just go with the funniest commercial.
Yes, absolutely.
What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people make when they're buying or renewing their auto insurance policies in particular?
And I don't have enough fingers or toes to tell you how many times someone has told me that they have full coverage. Generally speaking, full coverage means that you're just complying with the bare minimum required by the state. That doesn't mean you have great coverage or you got great policy limits. It just means that you're complying with the bare minimum usually. And what I just find that to be extremely vague and ambiguous. And when somebody tells me that, I think they have a very sad policy, so to speak. I always recommend people to typically get a $100,000 auto liability policy, $100,000 uninsured or underinsured motorist policy, and typically maybe 5 to 10,000 in personal injury protection coverage, because those can come in very, very handy. And a lot of people see the extra policies and think I don't need it, and so they just go ahead and reject them and feel that I'm good with having full coverage, when that doesn't exactly mean that you're going to be fully covered in a specific incident.
Yeah, that's and another thing that I think people don't always think about is, like, if you have multiple cars involved, and or multiple people in the car, or all this other stuff, like, it can change how that money is divvied up, correct?
Absolutely, yes, because it's usually there's a cap on how much can be paid per policy. So if you have a $30,000 liability policy, then the max they will pay out per incident or per accident is $60,000. Meaning, so if there's four claimants, then all of those four claimants are going to have to split the 60. Okay, and not one can get more than 30. So, and it's usually first come, first serve when there's multiple claimants involved in an accident. So, if you are caught in that situation, make sure to get an attorney very, very quickly and get the medical bills and records or demands sent out to the insurance company, so you can be the first one to properly get paid out on that claim. Otherwise, if all the funds are paid out before you get there, then you're not going to get anything, sadly.
Wow, you wouldn't get anything at all, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Some insurance companies are better than others when it comes to that, but some of them are just, like I said, first come, first serve, and they're just going to be like, oh, we already paid out the policy, we're done, and just basically go on to the next claim, and that's how it works. Yeah,
that's crazy. If you do get into an accident, unfortunately, and you mentioned that you can always go after the driver for more beyond what their insurance is, but let's face it, a lot of people don't have a ton of money to be sued for. Can you sue the insurance company for more, or is it case dependent?
Oh, that's case dependent. If you're going to sue the insurance company directly, you obviously sue the person that was involved in the wreck, and the insurance company provides coverage. But when you have to, and some people might find this a little confusing, but sometimes you have to sue your own insurance company. If you have an uninsured or underinsured motorist claim and they're not properly paying you, then you have to go and file a lawsuit, and you're going to basically sue your own insurance company. And in some cases, I really like that, because you see, when you go to trial and you put that jury charge in front of the jury, and they're going to see, it's Miguel Garza, so to speak, versus insurance company, and they're going to, not an individual, not somebody that may or may not have money, a multi-billion-dollar insurance company. And insurance companies aren't going to like that when a jury sees that, because they're going to think like, oh, obviously they have a lot of money, they can afford it, and they can pay out on this claim, or this verdict rather. So sometimes you have to do that, because some companies prefer not to pay out as much. Sure. But most companies tend to be reasonable about that. And one great thing is that the Texas Supreme Court a few years ago noticed that this was an ongoing problem, that insureds were having issues with their insurance company and being forced to sue their own insurance carrier. And it was essentially kind of clogging the courts and creating a backflow of things that just really just made it complicated and more difficult to get a trial setting. So the Supreme Court said that in their ruling, that attorneys like myself, if they have to sue their client's insurance company for uninsured or underinsured motorist benefits, then the attorney gets attorney fees on top of any settlement or verdict or judgment that a jury may render. So wow. Not only can they get hit with that verdict, but they can also get hit with another $100,000 or $200,000, whatever the case may be, for my own attorney fees. So it's usually a good incentive for them to pay up.
To pay up, yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and I really like that case, by the way. That's Texas Supreme Court case. So
Yeah,
it works out because it's not only helping, me, but most importantly, it's helping my clients and the general public. Nobody wants to have to be forced to file a lawsuit just because somebody doesn't want to pay out when they're properly, entitled to be compensated.
Yeah, when the person that did the right thing, they got all the coverage they're supposed to have, and then all of a sudden their insurance company's like, "No, we're not going to do that." Yeah, that's. I'm glad they have that law in place. That's great.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before that people think they have full coverage, but they don't. To finish us out today, what would you recommend someone who might think they have full coverage look at on their policy to really see what they could possibly be missing?
Definitely, like I said, the uninsured and underinsured motorist coverage and the personal injury protection coverage, I think, are the most important ones you want to have. You may be able to get by without having collision coverage, but if you don't have collision coverage, then you have to wait on the at-fault insurance company's investigation to be completed before they'll may or may not accept responsibility for the wreck. And if they don't, then you're going to be without a vehicle. And if they do, that might take weeks or months. So you're going to be without a vehicle, that entire time. So when you have collision coverage, you can basically go with your insurance company and have them take care of that and take care of your property damage claim. And then when the insurance company, the at-fault one, makes their decision, they'll be reimbursed by that company at the time. And your insurance company won't necessarily charge you anything for that. They're going to be reimbursed through what's called subrogation from the at-fault insurance company. But, generally speaking, some people are also worried about having to file claims through their insurance company because their premiums are going to go up. That's not always the case. Mm-hmm. These insurance companies do biannual or annual reviews to see if somebody is considered a high risk, meaning that they file multiple claims a year or multiple claims within a few years. But if you haven't filed any claims, within 2 or 3 years, then generally you're not high risk and your premiums are not necessarily going to go up if you do have to file a claim while you wait for the other insurance company to conduct their investigation, or if the other driver may be uninsured. So definitely better to have, in my opinion.
Yeah. That's good advice. Good advice. All right. Well, thanks for listening to MF Garza Law Firm, helping injured victims one Texan at a time. If you'd like a lawyer's perspective on whether your insurance coverage is strong enough, visit mfgarzalaw.com to reach out to Miguel. And don't forget to leave us a review, subscribe to our channel. We very much appreciate it. Miguel, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.